Hello, thank you for stopping by. My name is Becky and this is BecxReadz, and today I have a weekly reads update for you. These are the 4 books that I managed to finish reading between May 6th to May 12th. The first book that I finished reading was Woman of Light by Callie Fajardo-Einstein. Really butchered her name. This is a historical fiction with just a small dash of magical realism in it. And I got this mainly because I love this cover. I love sunsets. I love landscapes on books. In this, we are following a young woman named Luz and her brother who are living together, taking care of one another. She is a tea leaf reader and he is a snake charmer, and they are just trying to live their lives, I believe in Denver in the 1930s, I think. And one day her brother ends up being run out of town by a racist mob because he was interested in a very beautiful white girl. And because of this, Luz now has to find a way to provide for herself and take care of herself. So she ends up taking this job working for a lawyer, but she isn't meant for this like strict 9-to-5 working life. She has been having visions of her ancestors and seeing the stories and the events that happened to her ancestors. And she thinks they're just visions, but then she ends up realizing that they're dreams, and she is meant to carry on their stories. So she's meant for a lot more than just working in an office job. And she's meant to keep her ancestors' stories alive in this world that's trying to erase her and her people. This did not have as much magical realism in it as I was hoping for. About the only magical realism it has is the fact that Luz is having these visions, these dreams of her past ancestors. I did like the overarching historical family saga that we got. It was very interesting to see what her ancestors experienced in the lives they lived and how that flowed into her life and how she became able to have these visions. I also liked the aspect of her being a tea leaf reader and her brother being a snake charmer. In fact, when I read that in the synopsis, I thought it was going to have more of like a carnival feel to it because that's just what I associated like snake charming and tea leaf reading as, but it did not. I also loved the audio narration of this. I think it was really well narrated. If you are somebody who likes your historical fiction and you like family sagas and you like seeing a different representation in historical fiction, I think you would really like this. That is another thing that I liked about this is it's historical fiction, but it's set in the Americas. It's not like World War II or anything, and it's like modern historical. 1900s are historical nowadays, folks. But this wasn't bad, it just wasn't like a standout read for me. I then read The Prince of Prohibition, which is a new adult paranormal romance set in the roaring 1920s with fae. Lots going on there. So in this, we are following a young woman named Adeline and her brother who move from Georgia to New York City when her brother gets a job working for the FBI, I believe it is. And they're not really sad to be leaving their small town in Georgia because Adeline wasn't really welcomed there. The people thought she was cursed because every month she would have these dreams of this dark prince that would lead her into very seductive and risque situations. And so she would talk to things that weren't there, and people thought that she was cursed by the devil. So when she and her brother move to New York, they think it's a fresh new start until they get there and they settle into their new apartment and they realize that their new landlord is this dashing, wealthy, bootlegging criminal named Jack Warren. And Addie is horrified to discover that Jack is the man who she's been having visions about. And Jack also isn't human. He is a poison king of the Fae who have been ruling New York City very unbeknownst to the humans around them. And he needs Addie to unlock a certain power that he needs for the Fae. So this book I freaking loved. This was an addictive story. If you like Fae romances, definitely check this one out. This does have a comp of ACOTAR meets The Great Gatsby, and I don't really know that, I mean, I guess comparison-wise, it's not the worst comparisons you could come up for, but I think this book stands on its own as something unique. I liked the roaring 1920s setting. I really liked the fae world that was set up in here. It has a lot of different folklore included in it, which I was not expecting. There are banshees mentioned, there are pukas mentioned, and I found that really interesting. I liked the chemistry between Jack and Addie. They are a fated mates relationship. I also really appreciated that Jack is not a shadow daddy. He is a poison daddy, which I very much appreciated, because as much as I like the shadow daddies, they are becoming oversaturated. I need a new sort of bad boy power that isn't shadows, you know? He can't really touch people because he will poison them with his touch, but because Addie is his mate, whenever he touches Addie's skin, it acts as like a drug for her. It becomes like an aphrodisiac, and I loved it. I thought they had great chemistry. I also felt like this was a pretty slow building relationship. It took well past 50% for them to act on their interest in one another. This technically I think is a fantasy romance, but I'm gonna call it paranormal, because how I separate paranormal from fantasy is I consider paranormal anything with magic or magical creatures or magical beings that take place in a real world setting that discuss real world things. And this one did. It took place in New York City. There were mentions of the FBI. There were mentions of places within New York City that somebody could actually go and look at. There were mentions of things that happened in the 1920s. So I felt like while it had fae and folklore in it, I consider it paranormal, not fantasy, but it is labeled a fantasy romance. Take that with what you will. But I did order a copy of this book because I enjoyed it so much, and this is the first book in a series, duology, I'm not sure. So I'm looking forward to moving on to the second book, because I believe it follows the same couple. The next book I finished reading, I am happy to say that I actually made some sort of progress in my trying to finish out series this month, and I finished out this series. This is book 2, The Swift and Savage Tide by Chloe Neal. I didn't really know what this series is called. Oh, it's called the Kit Brightling duology. That's what it's called. In this, we follow a woman ship captain named Kit Brightling who has an affinity for the sea, which makes her an excellent ship captain. And in this book, she is sent off by the Empire and her queen to try and track down this escaped prisoner who is trying to take control of the Empire using some very dangerous magic. So she ends up going undercover to try and infiltrate his mission, and there she ends up crossing paths with Grant, who was her semi-love interest from the first book. They had chemistry, but it never really went anywhere beyond a kiss that they shared. And this being a few months later, she is surprised to re-encounter Grant, because he is also undercover for pretty much the same mission as she is, and they sort of have to pretend like they hate each other and like he's a bad guy. And they end up stranded on this island together, and their relationship just explodes and deepens until they are rescued, and they have to continue on their mission to try and track down this escaped prisoner. This is a seafaring pirate adventure, and I like this because it has really solid details into the pirate sailing lifestyle. You don't just get like a brief glimpse in it. It actually goes through some of the things that sailors and pirates have to do in order to survive on the sea. I also really like the small magical infusion in here with Kit being able to have an affinity with the water. This is a historical fantasy. It's in a completely made up world, but there's not a lot of magic in this world. Only certain people have magic, and Kit is one of them. I did like that this had more magic than the first book. We get introduced to sea dragons in this, which I thought were really cool. This also had a lot more action, I think, than the first book, and it had more romance than the first book. That was my one gripe about book 1, is that I wish it would have had more romance. And this definitely did. Kit and Grant definitely explore their relationship further. This has about 1.5 peppers worth of spice, whereas the first book had no spice. So I very much appreciated that. My one gripe about this is I feel like the ending was very rushed. And I think that's because this didn't get picked up to be a series. It's only a duology. And so I feel like the author needed to like squeeze in an ending to this story. But still, I really enjoyed this. I listened to this one on audio, and it was an okay audio narration. It wasn't a favorite by any means, but I liked it well enough, and I definitely enjoy this historical fantasy seafaring pirate adventure. And then the last book that I finished reading this week was this one, Nyla, Princess of Sheba. So I read this one because I was scrolling through the free ebooks on Amazon, and then once I was done, Amazon recommended me this. This wasn't free, I had to pay for it, but I was intrigued by it because it is a Black fantasy romance, and you don't see a lot of those. In this, we follow Nyla, who is the firstborn daughter of this very tyrannical emperor, and he wants to have a son because only sons are supposed to be mages, and mages are supposed to be the most powerful, like, magic wielders in this world. However, he just keeps having girls. And Nyla being the firstborn, it was prophesied that she would bring peace to this whole world, but her father just dismisses it because she doesn't show any proof of being a mage or anything like that. And she gets invited to this very elusive and mysterious empire. I think it's called Aska. I think we're gonna go with that. That nobody has ever been invited to. It is a walled empire that outsiders are not welcome in. So when the king and queen of this empire invite her to come visit, her father is thrilled by this. He tells her to go in and catalog what's going on in this empire and then come back and tell him all about it so that he can invade. So she goes to this empire and she meets the king and the queen, and she meets their son too, who is a very handsome crown prince, and they immediately fall in love with each other. Like, they barely know each other's names, but they are attracted to each other, and that's all that matters. So she loves everything about this empire, and she's amazed by it because this empire is full of magic that is called technology. It is this empire that is lost in time. That is why it's surrounded by this giant wall that goes all the way up to the clouds, and outsiders aren't allowed in because it is full of technology. It is full of riches. The streets are paved with gold. The castle is made of diamonds, and they don't want outsiders who aren't caught up with their time to come in and take the technology and the riches that they have and, like, ruin this very peaceful empire. So she loves this, but she has to go back to her empire. And when she gets there, she's trying everything she can to not tell her father what she's seen and experienced. But he brings in this powerful mage who is a mind reader, and they end up torturing her to find out this information. And so she ends up cracking, and her father ends up going into this empire Aska and completely invading it, demolishing it, and killing everything that the prince loves. So he sort of takes his revenge on her father's kingdom, and their story goes from there. So this sounds, in theory, like a great setup to a fantasy romance. It really does. I really liked this concept of this empire that was out of time, and this entire other empires around it were like more medieval. They weren't caught up with technology the way they were. They didn't have the riches that they had and all that. I really like the concept of, you know, this tyrannical emperor sending his daughter to spy, and she falling in love with this prince, and her unwillingly sharing that information. It all sounds great. However, this story is not well written. It's a very beat by beat writing style. It's like, I go to this empire, I meet the prince, I have dinner with the prince, I have to go home, I tell my father goes and he invades. It's a very beat by beat. There's no nuance in between. There's no real description in between. I wanted so much more from this world that I didn't get because things were just glossed over. Things happened really snappily. Like, apparently this empire that is full of this technology that we don't even have nowadays, it's like set in the future past our time, it has all this technology, and nobody's been able to invade it. And this story goes from her being tortured, her father finding out, her father going, and this wall just falls down. Like, what? How? What did he do? He doesn't have the technology that this empire has to build this. What did he do? He must have used his mage to like magic it down with his mind. Then it goes from her father knocking down the wall to my father decimated and killed all the citizens in this place. It's like, okay, but I would have liked to see that. But no, it's just like my father invades and everybody's dead. And then not too long after that, everybody's dead but the prince, and then the prince goes and kills her father. And I'm just like, where's everything in between that? I really would have loved to see everything in between that. I wouldn't say the writing necessarily is bad. It's how it was written. Like, I feel like if this was fleshed out more, if it was given more detailed and it was just elaborated a lot more, this would have been a great story. If it wasn't insta-love, if the relationship would have been dragged out until after he takes his revenge and then they fall in love, that would have been so much more satisfying. I really tried to find things that I enjoyed about this story, and the only things that I could really come up with were the fact that it was a black fantasy romance and I liked the concept of it. Those were the 4 books that I managed to finish this week. Let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these and what your thoughts are on them. But if you don't want to comment that but would like to let me know that you made it to the end of this video, could you leave me a wine glass emoji? I don't think there's a whiskey emoji. So leave me a wine glass emoji for The Prince of Prohibition, because that was probably my favorite read of this week. And with that, thank you so much for watching, and until my next video, good luck on your weekly reading. Bye!